Welcome to Emerging colleague Angela Zombek from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. How are you today, Dr. Zombek?
Good. How are you, Chris?
I'm well, thank you very much. The Supreme Court today passed down a ruling that upholds the idea of birthright citizenship as defined in the 14th Amendment. You and I had a conversation about this earlier in the year. I thought it would be a good opportunity to revisit that. Can you remind us just briefly, where does this idea of birthright citizenship come from?
Well, it comes out of Reconstruction, and it's significant because, first of all, it's the first definition of citizenship that was added to the United States Constitution. So when the Constitution was drafted, issues and signifiers of citizenship were really left to the states. So when the Civil War ended because of emancipation, there were a lot of questions surrounding the rights of recently emancipated enslaved persons and also of free blacks in the country. And as the early years of Reconstruction went on, race relations in the South really started to deteriorate. And so the Joint Committee on the Conduct of Reconstruction launched an investigation and came up with the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which then became the 14th Amendment to try to ameliorate those tensions in the South.
And who is covered under this birthright citizenship clause as it was written at the time?
Well, it's primarily intended at the time to grant citizenships to the approximately 4 million recently emancipated enslaved persons. There were there's some, and this is kind of the controversy that was swirling now, question about the clause in there about people who are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And so, really, that was kind of a carve out at the time for Native American tribes who didn't have citizenship until 1924. And it was also applicable to other persons who might be born to individuals like American or like foreign diplomats in the United States.
Now, one of the dissents from the court today mentioned that it wouldn't necessarily cover people who don't owe an allegiance solely to this country. That people would come here that have a baby, and that would sort of be a quote unquote anchor baby. But I'm wondering about this idea of like allegiance to this country in the context of the 1860s. Did African Americans feel an allegiance to the country? How would you kind of interpret that clause from the dissent in the context of the 14th Amendment's creation?
That's a great question. I think that they, especially individuals who were formerly enslaved, I think that they probably felt an allegiance to the idea of the promise of what the country could be.
Yeah.
So obviously they don't accept their status as being enslaved. And going forward, they're hoping that with emancipation, that the rights of citizenship, including the right to own property, the right to get married and have a family, the right to vote, to actually hold political office, to have a good education, all of that to them, I think, and to really all Americans is really the promise of the United States. And so I think that there's an allegiance to that idea of what citizenship could be.
And of course, you had hundreds of thousands of black men signing up to be in the army. So I suppose that's also an expression of allegiance in quite a literal way. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. To fight to not only preserve the Union, but to make this a place that Black soldiers, their families, when they become veterans, they really have a stake of ownership in.
Justice Thomas, in his dissent, mentioned that African Americans didn't really have a homeland, and so that's why the citizenship clause covered them, where it might not cover other people today. As a group or as individuals, did Black people in the 1860s have a sense of cultural or ethnic or homeland identity?
I think in the Black community, I mean, there were discussions when emancipation and even before emancipation really became a war aim, even going back into the antebellum period, there were discussions about colonization. Like if slavery ended, the American Colonization Society organized around 1817. It was in existence towards the middle of the century. And there was a proposal to send formerly enslaved individuals back to Africa. And several enslaved individuals and formerly enslaved individuals rejected that idea because they believed that the United States was their country too. It just needed to be rid of slavery, the institution of slavery, and rights needed to be, as expressed in the founding documents, made available to all, based on the idea that all men are created equal.
Yeah. And I guess I sort of think about how, so many people study their ancestry and then go back to their roots. And that's just for people like you and I, it's a lot easier than people who are of African descent because of the slave business just completely disrupted that sense of continuity,
Yes.
you know.
Yes. And after the war, or even, I mean, even in the latter stages of the war, formerly enslaved people are putting ads in newspapers looking for separated spouses, separated children to reunite as a family and move forward as citizens.
So, any other reactions to today's decision?
I think I mean, I'm stating the obvious. It's just such an extraordinarily important decision. And I think during Reconstruction, and as any group of politicians who has put together a constitutional amendment does so with the idea that this is something that's extraordinarily, intentionally difficult to change. And since this was the 14th Amendment encapsulated the first national definition of citizenship, it's so important that the Supreme Court upheld it as it was.
Yeah, I guess, when you talk about the intentionality about changing it to be able to do it by fiat, by any president, that just seems to be against the spirit of what the whole amendment process requires of something like that. So,
Exactly.
yeah. Well, Angie, thanks for taking some time to give us a little context about today's ruling. I appreciate it a great deal.
No problem, Chris. Thank you.
I'm Chris Mackowski on behalf of Angie Zombek for the Emerging Civil War. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.